Have you ever noticed how a sentence can float past you for months, almost like wallpaper, and then one day it stops you? Same words, same meaning, yet it suddenly feels personal, as if it was meant for this exact week of your life. Not because the message changed, but because something in you did. That's the kind of timing people rarely talk about. They imagine timing as a calendar moment, as if life is waiting to hand you a perfect set of conditions. But what usually changes first isn't the outside world. It's your inner capacity to receive something without immediately pushing it away. Readiness isn't a mood. It's a psychological stage. The moment your inner structure can finally hold an idea without turning it into an argument, a joke, a dismissal, or another maybe later. There are seasons when you can hear a truth and still not receive it. You can agree with it, even repeat it, yet it stays thin. It doesn't reach the part of you that would have to change. And that isn't stupidity or stubbornness, it's protection. The psyche keeps certain doors closed until the foundation is stable enough to handle what comes through. Because receiving a real truth costs something. It asks your identity to loosen. It asks your nervous system to tolerate uncertainty. It asks you to stop hiding behind the old story that has been keeping you coherent. That's why timing can feel strangely precise when it finally arrives. You look back and realize you were near the same insight months ago, but it would have bounced off you then. Not because you were behind. You simply weren't in the stage where it could land. Readiness changes what you notice. It changes what feels relevant. It changes which words pass through you and which words stay. And a lot of that readiness starts in the body. Your nervous system reaches thresholds that your mind doesn't announce. You can live in low-level bracing for so long that tension becomes normal. Tight chest, shallow breath, a constant background scanning for what might go wrong. Then one day, something small shifts. You react a little less. You recover a little faster. You feel a moment of calm, and instead of relief, you feel almost unfamiliar, like your body doesn't trust the quiet yet. Calm can feel strange when you've been surviving, but calm also creates space. Without the noise of constant defense, certain truths finally have room to appear. There's a difference between understanding something in your head and being able to stay with it in your body. The mind can say, yes, that's true. The body answers with tightening or ease. When a truth feels too destabilizing, your system will try to move away from it. Sometimes that looks like overthinking. Sometimes it looks like skepticism that sounds intelligent. Sometimes it's indifference. Sometimes it's sarcasm. These aren't moral failures. They're shields. They keep you inside what feels survivable. And yet, when your system becomes stable enough, something changes. You can stay present with the truth instead of escaping it. You can feel the discomfort without immediately covering it with distraction. That's a quiet kind of strength. It doesn't look like confidence. It looks like tolerance. 3 breaths longer than usual. A pause before the old reflex takes over. A willingness to remain in the room with yourself. Often, right before a truth lands, the old story begins to weaken. You may notice your usual explanations don't soothe you like they used to. You can still repeat them, but they feel lighter, less convincing, like a script you've read too many times. Familiar coping habits become dull. The loop still runs, but it doesn't fully sedate the unease underneath. And at first, that can feel like disillusionment, like you're losing something. In a way, you are. You're losing a chapter that helped you cope. Even if it limited you, it was familiar. Familiar stories give the mind a place to rest. This is why I can't. This is why it's complicated. This is why later will be better. When that story weakens, you're left closer to the raw feeling underneath it. Sometimes it's grief. Sometimes it's longing. Sometimes it's the quiet anger of realizing how long you've been negotiating with yourself. This is where identity transitions get real. You can't fully return to the old version of you, but you don't yet feel settled in the new one. You move through days with a sense of being slightly unfinished. The mind calls it confusion. The body recognizes it as a threshold. The future self forms in that space the way roots form under soil that looks empty. Nothing obvious is happening above ground, but something is establishing itself underneath. And in that gap, certain messages feel urgent and personal. Not because they're louder, but because you're closer to receiving them. You're less able to talk yourself back into the same corner. You're less impressed by your own delays. The old story doesn't hold you the way it once did. Clarity also changes when you stop chasing it with clenched hands. There's a kind of seeking that tightens you. You interrogate every thought. You demand certainty. You turn your inner world into a courtroom and call your own intuition to the stand. That pressure creates noise. It keeps you living from the neck up. Then, sometimes, clarity arrives through a softer route. When you loosen your grip. When you stop trying to control the exact moment you understand something. Detachment, in this sense, isn't coldness. It's space. It's the mind stepping back enough for perception to sharpen. You don't have to force readiness. You arrive at it. And when you arrive, recognition usually feels calm. It doesn't feel like fireworks. It feels like the end of an internal debate. The need to defend your position fades. The message stops sounding like advice and starts sounding like something you already knew, somewhere deeper, but couldn't hold before. If you want a small way to meet this without turning it into a performance, you might notice what your body does when you think about the truth you've been circling. Not to solve it, just to notice it. A hand on the chest or the abdomen, and a slower breath than usual. Then let a simple sentence appear, something honest, not dramatic. This is what I've been carrying. This matters. I've been avoiding this. You don't need to act on it in that moment. You only need to stay present long enough for your system to learn that the truth can be felt without catastrophe. Because internal timing is often that simple. It's the moment you can remain with what you know instead of immediately protecting yourself from it. It's the moment the old story can't fully convince you anymore. It's the moment you're willing to respond, not with pressure, not with urgency, but with honesty that doesn't run away. And if you're hearing this now in a way you couldn't before, let that be enough for today. Something in you has shifted. The roots are already working, even if the surface looks unchanged. And after that first recognition, there's often a strange in-between. You don't feel finished. You don't feel like a new person. You just feel slightly less available for the old way of living. The mind may still reach for its familiar explanations, almost automatically, the way a hand reaches for a light switch in a room you've walked through 1,000 times. But the switch doesn't work the same. The story turns on, and you can hear the emptiness in it. You can feel the difference between words that once soothed you and words that now only delay you. This is where timing becomes something you can sense in your nervous system. It shows up as a smaller tolerance for inner noise, a little more sensitivity to what's true. You might notice it in the body before you notice it in thought, a tightening when you start to compromise again, a dull fatigue when you tell yourself you'll deal with it later. Then, sometimes, a quiet release when you imagine choosing differently, even if you don't act yet. The body isn't always trying to give you answers. Sometimes it's simply telling you where the tension lives, where the split is still being maintained. And splits are expensive. They cost focus. They cost sleep. They cost that low, steady sense of being at ease in your own life. It can be unsettling because, in this phase, calm isn't constant. The calm comes in glimpses, a few minutes where you feel clear, almost plain, and then the old spirals return for a while, as if your system is checking whether the new stability is real. This is normal for transitions. The brain updates through repetition. It learns through evidence. So you get these small tests, a message that would have hooked you, a situation that would have triggered you, an old urge to explain, to justify, to to soften your truth into something more acceptable. And you notice yourself pausing. Not perfectly, just enough to see the pattern as it's happening. That pause can feel like a kind of internal authority. Not force, not control. More like you're watching your own life from a slightly steadier place. You might still feel the pull to numb out, to distract, to delay, but you also feel the cost more clearly now. Distraction starts to look less like entertainment and more like sedation. Overthinking starts to feel less like intelligence and more like a loop that keeps you from touching what matters. Even certain conversations begin to feel oddly repetitive, like you can predict the entire emotional arc before it happens, and part of you quietly chooses not to enter it. This can show up in everyday places. At work, maybe you notice the exact moment you begin to shrink. The moment you present an idea with too many disclaimers. The moment you say, "It's fine," when it isn't. The moment you accept a standard that has been draining you for a long time. Nothing dramatic happens externally, but internally there's a small friction, almost like a fabric rubbing the wrong way. Or in relationships, you might notice how quickly you translate your truth into something easier to swallow. How you become polite at the expense of being honest. How you keep the peace by keeping yourself small. When readiness grows, those moments start to stand out. They feel louder, not because you're becoming fragile, but because you're becoming more present. And that presence changes how time feels. Avoidance has a certain texture. Days go by quickly, yet the same unresolved feeling remains untouched. You stay busy, you stay functional, you do what you need to do, and still there's that unopened letter inside you, waiting. Readiness shifts the texture of time in a quieter way. You begin to notice the exact moments you usually skip over. The instant after a thought appears, when you rush to replace it with another thought. The instant before you send the honest message, when your body braces. The instant you want to minimize your own desire because wanting feels risky. These are small moments, but they're where your life is actually changing. Not in grand decisions, but in tiny choices about whether you stay with yourself or abandon yourself. If you want a gentle way to work with that without turning it into a performance, you might try something almost embarrassingly simple. The next time you feel that impulse to distract, to explain, to delay, let your attention drop to the body for a few seconds. Notice what's happening in the chest, the throat, the stomach. Then take one slower breath than usual and see if the sensation changes shape. Sometimes it tightens first, then softens. Sometimes it stays. The point isn't to fix it. It's to teach your system that you can remain present with discomfort without immediately escaping. Over time, that is what increases readiness. Not motivation, not forcing. Tolerance. And as tolerance grows, another shift often follows. You stop looking for the perfect message, the perfect sign, the perfect certainty. You begin to recognize that the inner opening is the sign. The less you force understanding, the more accurately you perceive what you already know. The mind still wants guarantees, of course. It will still try to build cases for why you should wait, why you should keep things as they are, why you should protect comfort a little longer. You don't have to fight that voice. You can let it speak without letting it decide everything. You can treat it the way you treat weather, something moving through, sometimes intense, sometimes mild, not always meaningful. Because the clearest form of timing is willingness. Willingness to stay present with what's true. Willingness to feel the discomfort of transition without converting it into a story that keeps you still. Willingness to respond in one small way, even if the response is private and imperfect. Sometimes that response is simply naming what you've been carrying. Sometimes it's one boundary that you don't over-explain. Sometimes it's one honest sentence you stop postponing. And if you're not there yet, if the resistance still feels thick, that doesn't mean you've missed your moment. It means the structure is still loosening. That's part of the process too. The roots don't look like progress from the surface, but they are the reason anything can grow at all. And somewhere in the middle of all this, you may start to notice a quieter kind of honesty forming. Not the kind that makes you confront everyone, not the kind that turns your life into a dramatic reset. More like an inner honesty that stops negotiating with itself every time the same truth returns. The truth still returns, but it no longer feels like a debate. It feels like a steady presence. Like a stone in your pocket you keep touching throughout the day, reminding you that something is real, even when you don't know what to do with it yet. This is one of the strangest parts of internal timing. The outer world can remain unchanged, while your inner relationship to it shifts. You might still be in the same job, the same routines, the same conversations, yet you're no longer fully inside them. You're half a step back, watching the mechanisms. You see how people pull for the version of you they're used to. You see how your own habits try to restore the old equilibrium. And you may feel a quiet fatigue with it all. Not anger, not contempt, just fatigue. A sense that you've done this particular loop enough times. That repeating it would require a kind of self-betrayal you can't do as easily anymore. That fatigue can be misread as laziness or burnout, but sometimes it's something else. A refusal to spend more energy maintaining an identity that no longer fits. There's a cost to pretending you haven't changed. It takes effort to keep acting like the old standards still work, to keep explaining away the same dissatisfaction, to keep softening your own instincts so you don't have to face what they're pointing toward. When readiness grows, the effort becomes more obvious. You can feel it like tension in the shoulders, like a tightness behind the eyes, like a constant low-grade pressure that lifts slightly whenever you stop performing. And then there's grief. Not always the dramatic kind. Sometimes it's almost invisible, like a thin mist. Grief for the time you thought you had. Grief for the version of you that tried so hard to make certain things work. Grief for the fantasy that everything could change without you having to risk anything. When the old story breaks down, you don't only lose the limitation, you lose the comfort of its familiarity. You lose the predictable logic that explained why you stayed the same. Even if you didn't love that logic, it gave your mind a sense of order. Without it, you're closer to the raw unknown. The unknown is where the nervous system often gets loud. It starts scanning for certainty the way a hand searches for a wall in the dark. You may feel the urge to force answers, to make decisions prematurely just to relieve the tension of not knowing. Or you may feel the opposite urge, to freeze, to wait, to tell yourself you'll revisit it later. Both are understandable. Both are attempts to regulate uncertainty. And this is where timing becomes a skillful kind of patience. Not passive waiting, but patience with your own transition. Patience with the fact that you're learning how to hold ambiguity without collapsing into old coping. Ambiguity is uncomfortable because it exposes you to a simple truth. You can't fully control what comes next. You can influence it, you can participate, you can respond, but you can't guarantee. That's what the ego struggles with. It doesn't mind change as much as it minds unpredictability. Predictability is the currency of safety. So when your inner readiness begins pushing you toward a new chapter, the mind asks for proof and promises. It wants a contract from the future before it allows you to step forward. And when no contract arrives, it tries to restore the old, familiar ground. What helps here is noticing that readiness doesn't always feel like confidence. Often it feels like a quieter willingness to be imperfectly honest. It's the difference between, I know exactly what I'm doing, and I can no longer pretend I don't know what this is costing me. That willingness might show up in small, almost mundane acts. You stop answering immediately. You take an extra beat before agreeing to something. You don't rush to smooth tension in a conversation. You allow someone's disappointment to exist without turning it into your emergency. These aren't dramatic moves, but they teach your nervous system something important. You can tolerate a little more truth without losing belonging, without losing yourself. Sometimes you'll feel the old reflex surge anyway. You'll catch yourself wanting to explain, wanting to justify, wanting to make your choices palatable so nobody can misunderstand you. That reflex is protective. It's an old strategy for safety. You don't need to attack it. You can simply notice when it appears and decide whether you want to feed it. That moment of noticing is already a form of change. It creates that small space again, the space where you're not fully identified with the pattern, where you're able to witness it instead of being swept by it. And the body will keep giving you feedback, not in a mystical way, in a practical one. There is often a difference between the tension of fear and the tension of self-betrayal. Fear has an edge, but it can come with aliveness underneath it. Self-betrayal tends to feel heavier, duller, more draining. As you become more present, you may start to distinguish those textures. You may realize that some anxiety is the nervous system adjusting to growth, while another kind of heaviness is the nervous system reacting to suppression. Learning that difference takes time, and it's rarely clean, but it's part of what makes your timing feel more accurate over time. If you want to hold this phase with something gentle, something that doesn't turn into a project, you might let yourself practice a simple form of non-escape. The next time you feel the impulse to postpone an honest thought, you could pause for a few seconds and name what you're doing without judgment. I'm about to distract myself, or I'm about to explain this away. Then take one slower breath and feel what sensation you're trying to avoid. Just long enough to prove to your system that the sensation is survivable. Not comfortable, survivable. This is how the nervous system learns new safety. It doesn't learn it through speeches. It learns it through small experiences of staying. And in those small stays, the next step tends to reveal itself in a quieter form than you expected. It won't always look like a big decision. Sometimes it looks like removing one tiny lie from your day. Sometimes it looks like letting a boundary be simple. Sometimes it looks like choosing not to re-enter an old dynamic that you already know how it ends. And sometimes it looks like nothing more than a steady internal acknowledgement. The old structure is loosening, and I don't have to rush to replace it today. Because timing, in the deepest sense, is not a single moment you either catch or miss. It's a gradual shift in what your system can hold, a widening of your capacity for truth. And as that capacity widens, you begin to live differently almost by accident. Less because you're forcing a new life, and more because the old life is losing its grip on you, one small moment at a time.